All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ryan Apologetics 747. I have a nice guest tonight, a gentleman named Pastor Kevin Morgan, and we're going to talk about uh, the SDA perspective from Ellen White's food writings. And also, I'm not an SDA, so I'm going to discuss with Pastor Kevin Morgan where I might not agree with some of the, health reform writings that Ellen White wrote. But I'm going to give Pastor Morgan a brief moment to, tell you guys what his channel is and also just give himself an introduction. So go ahead, Pastor Morgan.
Well, thanks so much, Ryan. I appreciate you inviting me here. And just to give a brief introduction to my channel, it's just my name with my middle initial, Kevin L. Morgan. It didn't have a lot of forethought. I just put that up so that I could post some stuff about my mom after she passed away and have a memorial place. And then I started thinking that I have done quite a bit of work, historical research that I could share with other people and do it in little short bursts. So I have been loading that on my channel. Just to let you know, my first book I wrote was this book. It's on the seventh-day Sabbath rest. Is there something missing in your busy life? I wrote that way back in 2002. And I'd have to say that it's mostly gathering together helpful information and then kind of putting it together. That's one secret on how to write, Ryan, is to rely on some other input. Then as time went on, there you go. I ran into a lady who had done some research on Ellen White's writings with some of the official people in the church. Her name is Marcella Anderson King, and she was a member of my church. And so we worked together on this book, More Than Words, about Ellen White's use of sources in her writing. Then I kept thinking about it, working on it, and did a seminar and realized that I could rewrite it in a whole different form. And this one came out, White Lies Soap. It's a play on the name of Walter Ray's book, White Lie. And soap is the thing you use to clean things up with, right? So that was the intent in that book. I wrote a book as I was taking some material. This was I was taking some classes on history, and one was on Civil War. So I asked for permission to do my major project on Ellen White and the Civil War. And that turned into this book, Journeying to the Same Heaven, with the subtitle Ellen G. White, the Civil War, and the Goal of Post-Racialism. The last book was just kind of an annotation of another person's book that had been written way back earlier in the 1950s, before my time. And it's called Literary Beauty of Ellen G. White's Writings. And I just added some materials in it that were updates from the time that she first wrote. So those are the ones that I have written myself. I've co-written a couple of one other book, and I have edited over 50 other volumes for different people, from stories to theology to different things, and enjoy working with words and helping people to make their materials their very best. So that's a little introduction to my work. And I asked Ryan if he would give me the list of quotations that were of interest to him so that I could research them. So I have some background material, and I'm going to let you, Ryan, take it from here, guide our conversation. Where would you like to go?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll get right into the PowerPoint. But foremost, I want to say I'm really sorry to hear about your mother. I mean, that's terrible, and that's a beautiful thing that your YouTube channel started just to, honor her. So sorry about your mother foremost, more than any of these other things. That's, the more relevant thing here. But also, I'm very impressed by what you've done. Like I said to you before we went live, I know what it takes to write a book. And just one other thing, if people are trying to buy or, look for any of your books, where should they go? Amazon or just to your YouTube channel? What's the best place?
Amazon carries some of them. I found out that you'll have to do a little searching on some of them because these are sort of out of print. I mean, they are available. There's some more copies of White Light Soap. It's one of the most available. More Than Words, I know there are plenty of those. And Sabbath Rest, you could order them from me. The other one is Journeying to the Same Heaven is available through Teach Services Inc. I do editing for them, and I'm going to be coming out with another book through that publisher entitled Glory, Glory, Glory. Ellen White's early inspiring vision books. And put a lot of research into that one, and I'm still working on that one as it goes. So different sources, but Amazon would be a good place to start. And if you can't find it on there, do a wider search and you'll probably find the source. I found that they actually had a discount on White Light Soap through the one source that I found.
Yeah. And also people just like my channel, I'm sure if you just comment under any of Pastor Morgan's videos, you know, he'll communicate with you too. So if you're interested, just probably leave him a comment if you can't find it. And I'm sure you guys can figure it out by doing it that way also. But yeah, go ahead. If you want to share, because like Pastor Morgan said, I put together a PowerPoint because there were 10 quotes that I chose just that I saw as, you know, problematic from my perspective. But I asked Pastor Morgan to give the SDA interpretation and context for some of them. So I sent him the PowerPoint. So he put the quotes in chronological order, which is important because for some reason, you know, they're numbered. So, you know, 1 to 1,000 or whatever, but 1 might happen in 1910 and 2 might happen in 1890. So it's good that Pastor Morgan has put it into chronological order because that can kind of show, you know, the progression. We all know in our lives, earlier in our lives, we might believe something and then change or evolve or, you know, have certain reasons for it. So the chronological order is already a good insight that I didn't have or I didn't do myself. So yeah, go ahead if you want, Pastor Morgan. Feel free. I don't know if you can share it just like you did pre-show.
Okay, yeah. So I can do the presenting, and we'll use them in the order that I have, and you can chime in when you wish.
Sure, sure.
Okay, let's see. Present. I thought I had this right. Share screen. Okay. And we're going to do the entire screen. And
you got
it up. There we go.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. I think the reason why they put them out of chronological order is because they were grouped topically. So, you know, topically might not necessarily be in chronological order. Well, this was not the first one on your list, but it's the first one chronologically. And if you want to read it, I'll highlight what's there and you can read it. And then I'll call attention to what I see in it that I'd like to comment on.
Okay. Do you also have the comparisons that I had for each of our quotes, or is that not in this anymore?
I basically just pulled out the quotes. That was what I was working on.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So 680 is, it is impossible for those who make free use of flesh meats to have an unclouded brain and an active intellect.
Okay. I have changed the coloring for make free use of flesh meats because that's not saying using meat at all. At this stage in 1868, she's not making any kind of absolute statement. And the context we find here in this, it's called a testimony. When she would write a specific counsel for an individual or for a church, they were called testimonies. So these were, you might call them just counsels. And they would address some issue in the person's life. In this case, it's a lady that she doesn't identify her by name so that people can benefit from the counsel, but give the lady some discretion to, you know, not to reveal herself. So she calls her Sister H, and I don't know who she was. But apparently the lady had some health issues. And this is what she describes of her. She's a woman whose blood is corrupt. Her system is full of scrofulous humors from the eating of flesh foods. In other words, she has cancer in her blood. The next thing she points out, and this is something that we haven't talked on camera about, but we did offline, we had discussed this. The use of swine's flesh in your family has imparted a bad quality of blood. So she's not talking about all kinds of meats, but this lady is using pork products. And so she's saying to her, Sister H needs to confine herself strictly to a diet of grains, fruits, vegetables, cooked without flesh of grease in any kind. It will take quite a length of strictly healthful diet to place you in a better condition of health where you will be rightly related to life. Now, I want to stop here and give you some of my background on health. I'm not just a pastor, but I had a period in my life that I was interested in health. So I went to study at a place called Uchee Pines Institute. It still exists. It's in Alabama, outside of Columbus, Georgia. And what they did then and what they do today is that they have what they call lifestyle programs. People come there with health issues, and they address them through lifestyle changes. So while they are at the Institute, they have the opportunity to kind of see how that changes in their dietary and their lifestyle, other lifestyle issues can help them to reverse disease processes. It's very different from what you get from most doctors. Most doctors, they do blood work and they figure out what you've got, and then they prescribe certain medications, and basically you still have the same disease, but you have a way to cope with it and kind of manage your sickness. So diabetics don't stop being diabetics. People with heart problems don't stop having heart problems. They just kind of manage those sicknesses. But what we did there was to reverse disease processes. And we had people that would come there who had high blood pressure, had already had coronary bypass surgeries. Often they came there because other forms of medicine weren't helping them. Sometimes we had people with arthritis. Sometimes we had people with some kind of cancer. And so most of these have been connected with lifestyle issues. And so what I experienced firsthand was seeing people come with health problems, putting them on a different kind of diet, watching them dial back the process and see results within 2 or 2.5 weeks. One of the most striking ones that I remember from that time, and we're talking about probably before you were born, I'm not sure, but this is 1970, 76, 77.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went there right out of college. But anyway, there was a guy that came there, was an executive from Detroit, Michigan. He was, a smart guy. He had a good job, but his lifestyle was very sedentary and his diet was not very good. So he was overweight and he could barely walk. He was probably about your age. And when I remember him sitting just kind of wiped out in a chair in the large sitting room at the Institute. And he could just get up from one side of the room, walk to the other side of the room, and then he was out. And he couldn't manage. So we took him and we put him on a diet like she describes here of grains, fruits, vegetables, cooked without flesh or grease, and then started incrementally increasing his walking. So first day, he can walk across the room. That's the limit. And that we started adding to that, changed his diet, changed his level of activity, because with his job, he would get in his car, drive to work, take the elevator to his office, sit in his office, work a day, come home, take the car, and sit at home. So his level was really pitiful. So we started incrementally changing his activity. We drastically changed his dietary, and he was there 2 weeks. Before he go back to Detroit, he walked 2 miles without a break.
Wow.
So 2 weeks. Now, this guy is your age, he's at your bounce back. Accident back in March with my dog, and it fell down on the road, and I'm still hobbling. It takes me longer at my age to recuperate. But somebody your age, if you make changes in your dietary, you can see dramatic results. And he did. So I put that in the context of what she's saying, because it was what I actually witnessed. I saw this take place. And if she would change the dietary, she would have results not just in her physical well-being, but in the clarity of her thinking. She would have sharper thinking, and be more capable. So all of the things that are described here, I've seen actually take place. You ready for another one?
Well, I just want to give a quick
You have a comment.
my reasoning why I had this in my 10 quotes. The reason I had it within the 10 is because I think she was using some hyperbole, or went a little too far with the use of "it is impossible for those to make free use of flesh meats to have an unclouded brain and an active intellect." And I'd obviously point to Jesus himself eating the Passover lamb every year at Passover, eating fish, all the righteous biblical characters that ate meat, including, like I said, God giving the commandment for every Israelite in history and everyone who joined themselves to the nation of Israel to eat at minimum the Passover lamb every year. I just don't think it's good to use the exaggeration of impossible. So I mean, I'm sure maybe
let's take a look at how often somebody in Palestine ate flesh meats. This is not fish, by the way.
So fish doesn't count as flesh, according to Ellen White, or you?
No, not in this definition, because she's not fish. Fish is in good meat. As a matter of fact, if you know about this, there's been a health study of Seventh-day to correlate those that have one kind of dietary with their health benefits and outcomes. And so we've got Seventh-day Adventists are meat eaters, generally speaking, eat pork, but there are some who are vegetarians. There are Adventists who are vegans, which means they don't use dairy products in addition to meat. But there are also vegetarians which eat fish, which we would call pescatarians. And the interesting thing is that those that had actually the best outcome of all of them, and this was a surprise to me, were the pescatarians, because there are some really good benefits to fish in a vegetarian diet. It just, in addition to a principally vegetable diet, having some fish. So that is the diet of people from Galilee. That is the diet of people from Capernaum. They ate lots and lots of fish. And number two, they were not sedentary. They didn't have any other way of traveling but their feet. So they had a pretty good diet together with lots of physical activity. Jesus could have lived a good long while, except he was crucified when he was 30 some years old.
Yeah.
As far as the Paschal lamb, how often do you eat the Paschal lamb?
At least once a year.
Yeah, only once a year. Yeah. Paschal lamb is once a year. So if I urged and had some on once a year, I think they'd still call me a vegetarian.
I don't know about that. That's kind of like if you're a virgin and then you just say once a year, I'm going to do something else with a woman. I don't know. Are you still a virgin? Like, logically speaking, I have to disagree with. I think if you're a vegetarian is not going to eat meat, flesh at all. And I also, like I said, it's good to hear your perspective, because when I interpret these and I see the flesh meat, I include fish and flesh because it's not a vegetable, it's not a fruit. So to me, I interpret this as a fish is in the flesh meat category. But if you don't, that's your perspective on how you read it also. But
Well, also looking at the paragraph, what examples, what kinds of flesh were mentioned? Not
for what-
fish.
for are you talking about for her quote here?
Yeah, in the context that I provided,
Uh-huh.
the only kind of flesh she mentioned was swine's flesh. She didn't talk about fish. And I think if you read widely, you will discover the same thing, that that she's talking about flesh foods as in animal foods, that land animals that are used for food.
Yeah. The only other thing is, like I said, as my comparison, I had Matthew 19:26, where Jesus said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So when she used the word impossible, it kind of contradicted to me Matthew 19:26, where Jesus said, with God all things are possible. But we can move on to the next one unless you want to add anything else to this one, because we got 10 of them.
Yeah,
so.
I think the use of words has to be determined by context, and that's
Sure.
why I provided it. All right.
Gotcha. Sure.
Well, let me, my other screen went off, so I gotta turn it back on, and I'll move to the next one that we have. And it jumps to 658 because of chronology. That was in 1887, and I have I'll let you read it, but you can see which words that I have highlighted, as being significant, and we'll go to that after you read it for us.
Okay. The common use of the flesh of dead animals has a deteriorating influence upon the morals as well as the physical institution. Ill health in a variety of forms, if effect could be traced to the cause, would reveal the sure result of flesh eating.
Okay. All right. So notice it's the common use of the flesh of dead animals. She didn't say the absolute use. Okay. And if we use Jesus as the standard, he did not eat meat like most Americans. And he certainly didn't eat meat like the people of her time. I don't know if you've ever been to Williamsburg, where they have reenactments and stuff. I was quite interested with the dietary of the 18th century, 1700s. And it was very common for them to eat only meat with very few vegetables mixed in. And by the time that Ellen White comes along, she's describing the same thing when she says the common use of the flesh of dead animals. It's not an occasional use of it or a moderate use of it. It's common use. So that's a significant phrase. But let's look at it in context here. This is the longer quotation that one's drawn from. She describes it not just as the one cause, but among a number of causes. Disease of every stripe and type have been brought upon human beings by the use of tea and coffee and the narcotics opium and tobacco. These hurtful indulgences must be given up, not only one but all, for all are hurtful and ruinous to the physical, mental, and moral powers, and should be discontinued from a health standpoint. Okay? The common use of the flesh of dead animals, here's where that comes in, has had a deteriorating influence upon the morals as well as the physical constitution. Ill health in a variety of forms, if effect could be traced to the cause, would reveal the sure result of flesh eating. The disuse of meats with healthful dishes nicely prepared to take the place of flesh meats would place a large number of the sick and suffering ones in a fair way of recovering their health without the use of drugs. But if the physician encourages a meat-eating diet to his invalid patients, then he will make a necessity for the use of drugs. And as I have pointed out in a video that I will be uploading, you don't go to a doctor today for him to tell you how to change your diet and reverse your illnesses. She's talking about something that is a totally foreign concept to most physicians today. They take maybe one little quarter class on nutrition and multiple classes on pharmacology. The strength of modern medicine is big pharma, is pharmacology. And in fact, the big pharma markets directly to the end user. In multiple commercials, they say, ask your doctor if it's right for you. And so they drive the requests for certain drugs. And it's always kind of interesting to me when they actually give the list of the side effects afterwards. You know, it's like crazy. It's like, wait a second, I had one problem, but I could get that, and you could. And so, but we're so geared towards just managing our sickness through pharmacology that a doctor will never recommend very much of a change. They might say, you know, watch your salt, or you know, be careful about this. But if you went to the place where I trained, you would go there and they would give you what would be a radical change in diet, and you would see amazing results because it gets to the cause. And it's so common for us to use these products, all of these products that are mentioned in this paragraph, and we just kind of we get used to it. But you know what happens if you're used to caffeine and you drop off caffeine? If you don't have it one day when you've had it for many days, what happens? Well, for some people, they get a headache. Other people, they may have a little bit of anxiety or whatever. It's an indicator that you are actually maintaining a level of a certain amount of drug in your system. You are dependent upon it. It doesn't mean that you can't function. Great and smart people use all of these kinds of things. It's not to say that your body doesn't adapt and can't use it, but there's a cost to each one of those things that she listed there. Now, I don't know what your let's go back up to the original shorter quotation, and you can tell me about it, that what part of it that seemed not to jive with your thinking and the Bible.
Okay. Well, basically, I mean, I tried in my PowerPoint, you know, that I have here, I tried to use different scriptures for each one because honestly, I could almost use all the scriptures that I shared for each different one for all of them. Like, for instance, Jesus in Matthew 15 and Mark 7, you know, the same story about what defiles a person, saying nothing that goes into the mouth defiles you because it goes out your stomach, and what, you know, defiles you is what comes from your heart. I could use that on basically almost all these quotes that I disagree with her on. So I tried to use different ones. So for this one specifically, I used, you know, just Romans 14, you know, and, you know, 1-5, and then 14:14. I don't need to read them all. I mean, that's kind of why I had them in the presentation, so people could just see them and not have to read them all. But either way, she does to me here, and it's good that you're giving again your perspective as far as what she means by common use. The one thing I also would say is, you know, something we should be careful about is our speculation on Jesus's diet, because the Bible itself doesn't give us Jesus's diet, just like it doesn't tell us how often he was a carpenter. It kind of is, you know, just up to interpretation for us. I mean, we know he ate fish and we know he ate the Passover lamb, but we don't know what other foods of the Levitical food laws he ate. We just don't know. It's just pure speculation to say he ate meat once a month or he ate meat 30 days a month, you know? So that's one thing I did disagree with. Yeah.
It may be a degree of speculation, but having traveled in Mediterranean countries and also in Ethiopia, poor people don't eat a lot of meat because it's expensive.
Yeah,
and
I just
and so that is you know, that's a natural fact, and as you say, it's within the Levitical laws, so he certainly wouldn't be eating pork, right?
Yeah,
and that's a subject that we probably should discuss briefly when we get to that point. But what I'm the issue here is that to compare what Americans do with what Mediterraneans do are two different things. Even today,
Sure.
they talk about the Mediterranean diet, and it's not the American diet. You know, it's not Burger King, it's not broiled steaks. You know, it's a very different thing, and they live healthier as a result of it. They also use lots more olive oil, and that is something that's very biblical. But Americans don't use that much olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
We use probably canola oil or whatever's the cheapest oil that you can get. So some of the changes, like you brought up an important point, and that is that passage where he talks about what goes into a man is what it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but what comes out of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So defilement is one thing, but sickness is another.
Mm-hmm.
If I take strychnine, does it defile me?
If you get physically stricken, you're asking, does it morally?
If I take the poison strychnine.
Oh, I don't know what that is. What is that?
It'll kill you dead.
It's like a poison.
Yeah, it's a poison.
Oh, okay.
Like, or if I eat rat poison, okay.
Gotcha.
Will that defile me?
No.
No, because defilement is about the heart, our motives. All right. So when he's saying it won't defile you, that's a spiritual thing. He's saying he's talking about the heart, and Jesus always talked about the heart. Yeah. But what she's talking about is about a physical health. And so I hope you can see by some of the examples that I've given you, even if it's outside of your experience, because you haven't probably been to a place like I was, that by changing your dietary, you can improve your health. By changing your dietary, you can improve your thinking. If you have a high fat diet, it just kind of makes you feel lethargic. If you have a leaner diet, your body is able to digest it better, and your thinking is better. And these are just cause and effect relationships. Maybe it's radical because most people have never seen this sort of thing, and that's why I share my experience. But radical or not, there's basis in faith, in fact, for it. All right. So common use. I went to a wedding one time. I had never had goat. They were having goat at the wedding, and I said, "Do you I'd like to taste it," and they let me try it. It's like a one-time thing in my entire life. I'm still a vegetarian. I mean, you might say, "Well, that violated the whole thing." I'm saying, no. My general practice is I'm a vegetarian. I tried it that one time. I'm generally a vegan. I try to avoid dairy, but sometimes when I'm out, I get it occasionally. That doesn't change my general practice or what I do. I believe that I will benefit. It's not like some conscientious thing that if I do it, I have to go confess my sins or something like that. It's more that if I continue to eat a certain way, the results of good eating, of a good diet, is cumulative. As I eat better, I don't tend to have arthritis. As I eat better, I don't tend to have heart disease. As I eat better, I don't tend to have certain cancers. If I don't smoke, I don't have problems of the lung and other associated illnesses. If I don't drink alcohol, I don't kill brain cells. So there's a cause and effect with these different things. And this is what Seventh-day Adventists have tried to promote. But each person, as I pointed out in the study, has their own freedom to make those choices themselves. I don't go, I'm a pastor. I don't tell people how to eat. I can recommend things that have been helpful to me, but each of us is different. Each of us has to make our own choices. And so that's what we do. We teach principles, and that's what she did when it came to these statements. And she was recommending something specific for somebody who had certain problems. And if you don't make the dietary changes, well, about all you've got is, statins or some other kind of heart medication that just kind of keeps the disease at bay. But, you have one bypass surgery, you can have another bypass surgery. That doesn't stop it. You can have one stent put in your heart, but if you keep eating the same way, you'll probably have another stent. It'll just hold it off for a little bit longer. And each stent is thousands of dollars. Every bypass is thousands and thousands of dollars. For me, it seems that a simpler way is to look at from cause and effect. And I learned that from my grandmother. When I was a little kid, back in the 1960s, Grandma went to a doctor, and the doctor said, you've got cardiac insufficiency. She was starting to have these little angina pains in her heart. So the doctor gave her a bottle of nitroglycerin pills. Whenever she'd have an episode like that, she would take one of those pills, put it under her tongue, and it would kind of let off the pain. And she started thinking, okay, so what's going on in my heart? I've got these coronary blood vessels that are supplying the heart with oxygen, and my heart is crying out for oxygen because these little blood vessels are getting blocked. Well, what's causing them to be blocked? Well, probably the amount of fat that I'm eating in my diet. That's probably what's causing it. She was not a doctor. She hadn't studied this, but she just kind of thought it through in a commonsensical way. So she decided, well, what do I eat that puts fat in my diet? And she ate lots of vegetables. I ate at her house a lot. We enjoyed going to her house, and she'd eat vegetables, but then she would fix these little meatloaves, and I had some of the meatloaf. She'd cut it up, and for us kids, she said, that's the thing. It's these meatloaves. And I learned later that, some of the meat that goes into the meatloaf, it tends to be some of the fattier part of the animal. And it's kind of, today they marble the fat into the muscle. So it's a fattier kind of meat than some other kinds. So she cut that out of her diet, and she started walking every day. And I remember that she kept that same little bottle of nitroglycerin pills from the 1960s until her death in her 80s in the 1980s. And she didn't have to use it up because she reversed her heart problem.
Those pills didn't expire, man. That sounds like it's dangerous going a decade with the same bottle. I would have bought a new one.
She didn't use them. She didn't use them. She kept them as a reminder of what she could have been doing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I missed that part. I thought you were saying she took them up to her.
No, she didn't need them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so these are the differences in mentality between disease management and health care.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Eating healthy is obviously going to spiritually make, being spiritually sound with God easier, because I'm disabled. I broke my neck, and I know the pain I live in, and, the stuff I go through, it affects my positivity some days, which doesn't make me always have the easiest time being kind to others or being patient with others or other things like that. So I totally understand a sound diet being a positive thing, just like working out could be a positive thing. The thing I would disagree with her quote is, I would never tell somebody, if you don't work out, it's going to deteriorate your morals, because I don't think biblically Jesus taught that. But the other thing is, as far as her recommendations, as tea and coffee and, obviously the tobacco and opium are more extreme. So I understand, her maybe seeing a problem in the culture with those things and saying, that's not of the Bible, because, God does say, I forget where in Corinthians, but you're not supposed to defile your temple. So if you're abusing tobacco like I was in my life, God showed me, that scripture one day and got me to help me quit cigarettes. So I'm totally fine with her helping some people within the community in that manner. As far as if it's deteriorating your morals, like tobacco maybe possibly could be. But I think where I have an issue with her too is kind of her where she gets the authority to kind of start saying tea and coffee are bad too. You know what I mean? Like I think some of the stuff like the tobacco and opium probably comes from a good biblically sound positive place that you're not supposed to defile your temple, especially if you see people abusing those things. But the tea and coffee part, I don't see a priest or a nun drinking tea every day or coffee every day having any moral effect on them. Would you say, do you agree? Because I don't think you have to agree with everything she wrote. You're just from the SDA perspective defending it, and putting it in context for us. Nobody's making you agree with everything she wrote word for word because you're your own person. So that's why I'm going to just ask
I could disagree, but as I have studied it and put it in context, it makes sense to me. For example, here where you talk about the influence upon the morals, we're going to see in another quotation what she means by that. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a manuscript 22. So it was never directly written to somebody. She's writing her ideas and putting it down. Before she would get it to somebody, a manuscript would be rewritten. Okay.
Yeah.
But the context of the tea and the coffee was not about morals.
Okay.
What was the context of the tea and the coffee? Disease of every stripe and type.
Okay.
And so what it's saying is that even though these seem to be innocuous things, tea and coffee seem to be innocuous, she's saying that it does cause certain kinds of disease. Now, I know I'm laying an awful lot on you, and this is not something that you have ever really studied. The tobacco we're in agreement on. I decided I wouldn't use it because my grandfather was a chain smoker, and he, all I remember of him as a kid was a hacka from his emphysema. Yeah. So that was pretty clear. And some things are more obvious than others, but I have a friend who was this is a female friend who went in who had some lumps in her breast, and she was talking to some of her friends who were Adventists, and they said, well, that's connected with the chemicals in coffee and in caffeine. If you take the caffeine out, then you can reverse that disease process. And she said, really? So she cut out caffeine, and the lumps in her breast disappeared.
Yeah.
So there are diseases that we have no connection. It's so common for women to have problems with their breasts, and they don't know that if they tried to do without caffeine, that they might actually fix their problem, because people just don't talk about that. But there is some research that backs that up, and that's why these friends were able to tell her about it. So disease of every stripe and type, that means different kinds. Stripe and type, it's an old expression, and so these have an effect on our bodies. They are chemicals, and chemicals, maybe they're not the strongest of chemicals like heroin or like tobacco, but they are chemicals, and so the body has to filter them at minimum in order to get them out. You could actually OD on caffeine. If somebody mainlined caffeine, it would kill them. Why doesn't it kill you when you take it in a certain dosage?
But you can die from water too, just not to interrupt you, but just for, we can die literally from drinking too much water. So we got to put it in perspective,
Right. But from a different process, that process would be that you have diluted your, what's the chemicals in your body, like sodium and that balance. You've thrown off your balance. But that would be crazy. But the thing is, but you don't have to send water to your liver to detoxify it. Every drink of a caffeinated beverage has to be treated by your liver. As long as you've got a good liver, you can take a certain amount of it and, and benefit from it by, increased alertness and whatever. But it does require your liver. And if you don't have it, you go into a kind of withdrawal. Now, it's not as severe as a heroin addict, but people get nervous, people get headaches, all of those things, because it is, after all, a chemical.
Yeah.
And so, maybe you can say, all right, well, we can put these things on a spectrum, like tobacco would be way over here, heroin would be over here. And then we can look at other things and say, this causes more disease than this, than this, than this. Okay, we can put them on that kind of a spectrum. But what she's saying is that they all have their effect. And it's not a moral issue.
Well,
it's a health issue.
Well, what do you have the sentence below the bottom and moral should be? Because it seems like, just for the way I'm interpreting it, maybe we interpret it differently. It seems like she is including tea and coffee with opium and tobacco, because the next sentence says these hurtful indulgences must be given up, not only, but for all are hurtful and ruinous to physical, mental, and moral powers, and she should be discontinued from a health standpoint. So to me, I think she is including, in my opinion, the tea and coffee with the moral powers in that next sentence.
Okay. But you kind of you hinted to this in what you were saying about how that pain affects you, and you talked about how that tobacco affects you. Yeah. I mean, they have a more profound effect on certain aspects of your thinking. Maybe there's a lesser effect for a cup of coffee or a Coke or something. But she's saying that it does have its relationship, and she recommended that let's put it quite frankly, you don't need it for health.
Sure.
That's not why people use it.
Yeah, and again, she's doing the best she can also in the 1800s. So I'm sympathetic to the fact that I have the internet. I have a lot more information. I have a lot more health information than she had. I mean, survival is all they were trying to do in the 1800s for a long period of time. So I'm not trying to knock any of her, anecdotal information that she's found beneficial in her life or around her. Because in that time, the coffee could have been very different than the coffee is today. So it's also important that we keep that in perspective too, that what they had as coffee might have been very different than what people put in their Keurig every day. I get that part too. You know what I mean?
It could be.
Sure.
But anyway, it's more of a minor point, and truthfully, not every Adventist follows this.
Yeah. Like you said, it's subjective to the people within the SDA church. I've watched of your Ellen White Reconsidered videos. I have watched a good amount, at least over 10 of them. So I know you did make the distinction with her health reforms not being considered SDA doctrine. So maybe her health reform is separate from the fundamental beliefs of the SDA church. I don't know. I don't want to speak on that. You know better than I. But I did hear you in one video make the distinction that it's not considered a doctrine within the SDA church, which is important because, the fundamental beliefs are obviously more of your core,
They're biblical. Yeah, everyone is biblical. Yeah, I made that distinction, and you called the very, very, very basis for health reform. You said what Paul says in 1 Corinthians, that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the biblical principle. Okay. That's the biblical principle. But how you apply it, each person is going to have to make those decisions.
Sure. Okay. So we want to go to 652 now. That's the next in the chronological order.
It is. And, and I've highlighted some things. This is a longer one, but I'll let you go ahead and read it for us. Okay.
All right. Yeah. I've been reading them just on my screen because it's easier than, if you had to scroll down or something, it's just easier for me. So, okay. It is not the chief end of man to gratify his appetite. There are physical wants to be supplied, but because of this, is it necessary that man shall be controlled by appetite? Will the people who are seeking to become holy, pure, refined, that they may be introduced into the society of heavenly angels, continue to take the life of God's creatures and enjoy their flesh as a luxury. From what the Lord has shown me, this order of things will be changed, and God's peculiar people will exercise temperance in all things.
Okay, I'm going to give you the first shot on this, why this seems objectionable to you, and then
Sure.
then I'll deal with it, okay?
Sure. Okay. For me, what I had as my comparison quote, like I said, I could use, the same quote for a lot of these, but I tried to use different ones to show different biblical verses that I think are relevant to why I disagree with this quote. I used Luke 24:42 through 44, where, Jesus is resurrected at this point. He hasn't ascended yet, but he's coming to show the disciples that he resurrected. And he tells them to cast the nets into the water, and they come back with a whole net full of fish, and then he eats broiled fish with them. So in Luke 24:41 through 44, just to read it quick, and while they still disbelieved for joy and were marveling, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before them. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." So the reason I put this as relevant to the context of what she's writing here is because she's saying if we're going to ever be with holy angels and amongst, the divine beings, we have to stop eating, flesh meat and stop killing God's creatures. But Jesus is obviously the Son of God and God. This is after he's resurrected. So he's obviously in his body that he's eternally going to be able to be in. And in my opinion, he goes, into also spiritual form. So he's not just stuck in a body, but he can go to that body whenever he wants. But he's eating fish in that form. So to me, it's kind of unbiblical to accuse any human being of not being in a state of, fellowship with angels or God himself, because they're eating flesh, when our only teacher is Jesus, and Jesus, after he resurrected, ate fish. So you can go from there.
Okay. Well, I'm beginning to see, and I think in the quotation in the video that I sent you, that I was just kind of riffing, when I was driving, I think I'm misguided on this, and I take responsibility for that, because I was talking about the history of how that Adventists came to their views, and I said something about fish, and because most of the early Adventists were from New England, it was when they gave up pork, they didn't give up certain kinds of fish or shellfish like oysters and things like that, because that was very common to them. So while they may have given up pork, they continued using some of the life from the sea to eat. And so I think I put it in your head that Adventists are against eating fish, and what I've tried to do here is to distinguish that there is some difference between those two. That fish, at least of the clean kind, are healthier fish. There are some fish that are bottom feeders, and because they're bottom feeders, they are accumulators. This is, if you ever watch the process of, the little fish is eaten by a bigger fish, by a bigger fish, by a bigger fish. And then there are some fish that are down at the bottom that whatever debris goes down, they eat it. And they're kind of the sanitation engineers of the ocean. So they have an important job, but they tend to concentrate certain elements. So it's much easier to get lead poisoning and other kinds of poisoning from oysters and clams and things that are the bottom feeders, because all the junk comes down and they tend to concentrate it. It's if the other fish eat it, it's in their flesh and they eat it. So they concentrate what it is. So kind of sea life is probably the most dangerous. And we had a friend that had an oyster bar in Augusta, Georgia, and periodically they'd have to send people away feed them because they get a bad batch, get
Yeah.
sick from it.
I've
So
never
there are
been
some.
a fan of those. I've never been a fan of those raw oysters. Everybody, oh, it's a
Yeah.
delicacy or whatever. It's an aphrodisiac. To me, it's terrible. It's garbage. I don't want it. I don't want it. You know.
Well, and you haven't developed a taste for
Oh.
people that have. Of course, Adventists. So what I described when I it was just off the top, is that they didn't make those distinctions at first. And the point I was trying to make is that the motivations for making the change to get rid of the hog was not Leviticus. Leviticus was just kind of a reinforcement of what they were already realizing, just because of the nature of the animal, the nature of its flesh, the high fat content, and so on. When they gave up the pig, they immediately started feeling better. And I would recommend that to anybody, whether you use Leviticus as a justification or not. If you avoid the use of pork products, you'll probably be much healthier. And if you limit it, I'm just talking, as from a health standpoint, if you limit your use of pork to you will also benefit from it, because diet is a cumulative thing. All right. So what was she saying here about continue to take the God's creatures as a luxury? If you study what she talked about, people are already recognizing that you can get a good in your diet. You can get sufficient protein and carbohydrates and the right amount of fats, all from a vegetarian diet, so that eating of animals as a food is not a necessity. Some countries it might be, because it's a limit of foods. But in this country, it is not a necessity. It is a luxury. Go out to eat a steak, their body needs it because they like it and it tastes good to them,
Yeah.
And so once you recognize that you don't need these things, to go ahead and eat them just because your appetite craves them, tells you that you are not guided by the principle of what you need, but you're guided by your appetite, what you want. And I think that that's fully in keeping here. Now, something else about the animals. About the organization called PETA.
Oh yeah.
Right? PETA.
Yeah.
You know what their big beef is?
I mean, they're always throwing blood on celebrities that wear fur. I know that, or fake blood.
Okay. So they're saying killing animals just for their fur is a big deal, but they also are into vegetarianism, and they're into the inhumane killing of animals, and so if you look at it from a humanitarian point of view, there are many people who will make the change because they don't like animals, and this is one of the motives for people in making changes about diet. I don't like hurting animals. We have a cat and a dog, and they're I wouldn't think of sacrificing them for food. And my mom said they used to raise rabbits, and the one mistake that you would ever make, ever named the rabbit, you wouldn't want to kill it for food, because it was a pet. You were invested in it.
Yeah.
Ellen White understood this side of it. This is the moral side of it. If you are keeping an animal just to kill it, to eat it because you want to kill it and eat it, there is a moral dimension to that choice.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt you, but let me just push back on that. Then what were the priests that were sacrificing thousands of Passover lambs doing? What were they doing? Something that was against God's morality?
They were, well, they were, what were those sacrifices emblematic of?
Jesus.
Yeah. And what about Jesus?
That he is our Passover lamb.
That he was
Our
going
Savior.
to die.
Okay. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. You're saying if you kill an animal just to do it, just to eat it, it's morally a moral dimension. That's why I don't see it biblically as morally incorrect if the priests themselves are sacrificing it by God's commandment. It's a commandment from God. Those priests had to do that to obey God. If they didn't do it, they were disobeying God. So
Sure.
to me, the moral dimension would be obedience to that, to do it.
Okay, so in that case, you are saying the sacrificing the animal, it's not about the death or the use of it or whatever. You're saying that moral issue there is following what God said.
Sure, just like Saul had to kill the Amalekites. Like, we're not gonna. It might we're not going to endorse killing people as a good action, but when God gives you a commandment to do so, there's a purpose behind it that we might not understand, but God understands. So I don't like to hurt animals. If I find a bug in my house, I try to not squash it because I can relate. In my car accident, when I broke my neck, I felt like a bug that got stepped on. I realized how fragile my mortality is. So I'm with you on, like, it's not a. I'm hypocritical because I love cheeseburgers, but I don't want to kill bugs. You know what I mean? I don't want to kill cows. I'd have a hard time.
If you had to kill the cow, you probably would think about it a little bit differently.
I might not do it because I might not be capable. But at the same time, in Luke 15, when the prodigal son returns, and that was one of the scriptures I didn't have in my comparisons, but I had, like, I brought it up as a concept for you.
Yeah.
And it kind of relates to this quote where she's talking about, being with the angels and communion with them. Luke 15:22, but the father said to his servant. So I think we'll all agree the father within the prodigal son parable is relating to God the Father. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. And then the other son gripes and he talks about, you didn't even kill a goat for me. But again, I know if we're going to keep the Bible as our foremost truth and our foremost standard, I do think some of the things, again, I'm not attaching them to you personally, but just I do think some of Ellen White's writings, she may have, gone too far in some of her opinions because they were her personal choices and preferences. But she started to attach them to morality and God, and say that the information was given to her from God. And again, that's where I kind of have okay, this is the definition of a false prophet to me if she's saying God gave it to her. If she didn't say God gave it to her, then it would be fine. It would be her own opinion. She might not agree with the way the Bible portrays some things. She might want to, live like Daniel did in Babylon, where instead of eating the foods of Babylon that probably had pig and other foods that he didn't find, under the Levitical food laws, and he chose to eat vegetables and he was just as healthy. She might want to live like that. And that might be where she reads the Bible and gets some of her basis. Personally, like I said, I believe Jesus did make all foods clean. So I do eat pork. I don't think there's a moral attachment to that. I don't want to get too on a tangent and start talking about the Levitical food laws, because that's kind of a tangential subject to what we're talking about here, Ellen White's food writings, but we can definitely get into them somewhat or get into them on another show. But
yeah, I think that passage is a good one, and I would like to deal with that one because I think there's a misunderstanding. Well, you've actually in this very discussion, you have actually pointed to the actual meaning of that passage.
Which one? I'm sorry to interrupt. Which one are you talking about?
When he said, thereby cleansing all foods?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be a valuable thing for us to discuss because we did pre-discuss it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think here, these, when you concentrate, and this, Adventists have difficulty with this as well. Councils on Diet and Foods, somebody with a proper motivation concentrated these statements together without their context, without seeing how they were applied at the time, and then kind of made them as absolutes. And that's how you were reading them, because that's the way they were presented, without recognizing that there is some play in these things, and that there are practical reasons, and that there are different levels of moral motivation here. Like you said, you would have a hard time if you had to go and kill the cow, because you have a hard time killing an insect. Well, you don't have to kill the cow. You think about it as food. I never thought about that, but when I started going to an Adventist school, there were some kids that would make kind of a joke with somebody that if they brought some meat and they say, "You're eating a dead cow," and they say, "I am not," but that's what it literally was. It was a dead cow, but they didn't think of it as a dead cow. They thought of it as a hamburger,
Yeah, my mom stopped eating veal.
Most of us, when we think of food, it's food is food is food.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say my mom stopped eating veal
and Ellen White
a baby cow.
Never said that they were.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I can't. You're cutting up.
Yeah, you cut out a little. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said because it broke up.
Oh no, I was saying my mom stopped eating veal because she never knew it was a baby cow. So what you're saying about the dead cow thing, I can relate to that. If you know what it is and it's a baby cow, you start to feel bad. You start ordering chicken parm instead of veal.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got in a church that I pastored where a lot of the people work in the chicken industry. They don't eat chicken.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like seeing, going past cows that are getting milked, just seeing them all in the stalls lined up, just their whole life is eating grass or whatever they give them, and just getting milked all day. It's very sad, and it's an out of sight, out of mind within our mindset. So, morally speaking, I do see human beings misusing the blessings of the animals that God has given us, and mistreating the creatures, and that's not what God wanted from us. So I can definitely relate to that aspect of what Ellen White's trying to communicate through her own life. And especially as somebody in the 1800s, God knows what she could have seen people doing back then. So I can sympathize with that part of it. Again,
one story I remember reading. She was a very tenderhearted person, and there was a guy who very followed a very common practice, and that was when a horse was acting up, he actually beat the horse, beat it into submission. Now, if you ever go to there's some videos of horse whisperers. They have a whole different approach with animals, and they get far better results. But she said it just tore her up seeing how they were treating this animal. Anyway, so that's part of that. And one other comment I was going to make about the fatted calf. How often did they eat a fatted calf?
I mean, that's the speculation part. We don't know. Like, I have no clue how often the disciples were eating calves or goats or any of that stuff. It's all speculation. The Bible kind of doesn't write the specifics on that.
Why is it called a fatted calf?
I mean, the fattened calf obviously has been waiting for a special occasion. That one has obviously been waiting for either a holiday or a big feast, something like that.
Okay. That is just a minor point, but that is part of it. It's the fact that they didn't eat them all the time. But if you go to Burger King, you can have the fatted calf every day. You ever seen the movie Super Size Me?
Yeah, I've watched that one.
What was amazing to me was that when the guy, was having all kinds of health problems and his doctor was telling him to quit, he persisted, and then his body kicked in and started compensating. And that tells me that our God created our bodies remarkably resilient. So the thing that the doctor was afraid is going to kill him, eventually his body accommodated. But do you remember some of his symptoms, eating meat like he was?
Oh no, I watched that movie like 20 years ago almost, seriously. Like I watched it when it first came out basically.
He felt lousy. He had no libido, and he did have a girlfriend. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a good thing. But, but if he were married, he'd have the same problem.
Yeah.
And so it was and that may be part of the problem that people have, that they have no idea that their dietary is affecting so much of their life. One of the issues that we discovered, and this is kind of in the research that at the place that I was at in Alabama, was that there's that insulin resistance that you have in type 2 diabetes weakens a number of systems in the body. And one of those, it affects the sexual system, so that women who have that type 2 diabetes, which is almost 100% connected with diet, can't get pregnant, or have great difficulty getting pregnant.
Yeah, diabetes.
And what they're not aware of is if they changed their diet, it would correct the type 2 diabetes, which we saw at that health institute. That was one of the things we were able to correct, even so much that we had a type 1 diabetic, a little girl that came there was no way she could go off of insulin. But when we controlled her diet a certain way, and it was just, it was the diet that I could have lived off of, but it wasn't what she had been living off at home. When we controlled her diet, we were able to lower her insulin to an incredibly low level. And when we did that, now there's some advantages that come with that, because as your sugar is out of control, so it affects your white blood cells, which is how you fight off disease. As foreign bodies come into your bloodstream, white blood cells eat them. It affects your clotting mechanisms. It affects your circulation. So people that have out of control diabetes often lose a toe or a foot or even part of a limb, because it affects circulation. So when we reversed that process, controlled their diet and the amount of sugar that their body was dealing with, they were able to adjust to it and reverse some of the effects of diabetes, so that they didn't get injured as much. They didn't have problems with cold feet as much. These were all responses to their bodies adapting to a higher level of sugar. When they brought the amount of intake of sugar down, they were able to better deal with diseases. So, these are just cause and effect. And that's what I would add to this. All right. Let's see, which one was yours? Okay, number 660.
652. Wait, what number?
I got 660 here. Was there one that I skipped?
I don't know. Which one did we just do?
Oh.
Which one did we just do? 660? I'm sorry. I think you cut out a little.
Now we're on 660.
Yeah, you cut out a little. I didn't hear you at all. What did you say? We're on.
I just lost you.
Yeah, we're on 660 now, or did we just do 660? I'm lost now. I'm sorry. I lost your connection a little bit. So, are we on 660 now? Pastor Kevin, do you hear me?
And
Sorry, guys. We're trying to. Oh, we just lost him. God bless, Brandon. Thank you for coming. God bless everybody. Thank you for watching. I hope he comes back. He looks like he had a technical internet issue for the moment being. Um, yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying it. This is, like I said, a good conversation to have because, we all have different views of the scriptures, and it's okay to interpret them, how you interpret them, whatever you think. Oh, he's back. Okay, good. Oh, yeah, sorry. We lost you for a second there.
Yeah, well, you had a little dial going,
Yeah,
and then it just quit.
yeah.
I was going to go to this next one. It's
Sure.
675, and I think there was an issue here. Let me go ahead and present, and I'll share screen.
Okay, so we're going to. Did we do 660? Or is that in chronological order, or 675?
Yeah, 660 would be. I don't know that there's. I think we've kind of covered some of the same stuff in 660, but if you want to read it,
sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see. Let me just see it quick. Oh, if everyone could discern these matters as if they had been presented to me, those who are now so careless, so indifferent in regard to their character building, those who plead for indulgence in a flesh meat diet, would never open their lips in justification of an appetite for the flesh of dead animals. Such a diet contaminates the blood in their veins and stimulates the lower animal passions. It enfeebles keen perception and vigor of thought to the understanding of God and truth and a knowledge of themselves. Yeah, it is overlapping with some of the other quotes she had, but obviously I disagreed with that one. But yeah, we can move on to whatever one. If you want 675, I don't care, whatever you prefer.
Just one point that I would make, and that is, you've heard of roid rage, right?
Yeah.
And because when you have too much of something, it does affect your mind, right? People tend to be more aggressive by the amount of those chemicals, the steroids that are in whatever they're dosing themselves with, and some of those elements are in flesh foods. So maybe it's not as profound because it's not as concentrated, but the free use, the more you get, the more it does affect how you think and how you react to the world around you. That's just
I can hear you on some of it, like if you're taking drugs like steroids or something, but if I'm just eating chicken every day or hamburger every day, I don't agree with her at all that it's going to make me have a harder time understanding God and the truth and knowledge of myself spiritually. I think the spirit and the flesh, like Paul, spoke about, are very different things. And, to me, again, I know we probably disagree on the Levitical food laws. So to me, like when Paul writes, everything's clean if you pray over it, paraphrasing, there's nothing unclean, those type of verses, to the pure all things are pure, those type of verses, which again, I understand you got to be careful on how literal you take some things, because he's not saying everything's pure. He's not saying drugs are pure. He's not saying, these got to be read in context, just like Ellen White's writings. But yeah, I mean, to me, I think if you read these, it can almost, like, especially to a person in the 1800s, it can kind of almost be scary. Like you're saying to them, like, well, if you eat a lot of meat, you're going to become aggressive like that lion or bear or whatever creature you eat. If you're eating bear meat or something, or I don't even know why somebody would eat bear meat, but the way she writes this, if you eat deer meat, you'll start to be like have a lower IQ, a lower animal, state spiritually. And to me, that's what I mean. That's where I totally disagreed with this. I don't think it's scientific or biblically sound. And I don't know, to me, that's where I'm at with it.
I would wonder if you would give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
And see if you might find some difference. I've never done a study of it, to know, but you might find that it does change your temperament slightly, or the people around you might say,
Mm.
You're a little bit different. What's going on? Who
Sure.
knows?
Sure.
Yeah.
And we can move on. Like we got, a few more of these, so we don't have, unless you want to spend more time.
675. Go ahead and read this one. It's a little bit longer.
Okay, sure. Like I said, it's easier on my screen. Okay. The meat diet is the serious question. Shall human beings live on the flesh of dead animals? The answer from the light that God has given is no. Decidedly, no. Health reform institutions should educate on this question. Physicians who claim to understand the human organism ought not to encourage their patients to subsist on the flesh of dead animals. They should point out the increase of disease in the animal kingdom. The testimony of examiners is that very few animals are free from disease, and that the practice of eating largely of meat is contracting diseases of all kinds, cancers, tumors, scrofula, tuberculosis, and numbers of other like affections.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You see the words that I have highlighted on my version of it there?
Yeah, sure. They should point out the increase of disease sorry, I got the comments on my television blocking that, in the animal kingdom and eating largely of meat. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Now, again, just like I said, the free use, notice here it's eating largely of meat. So there's an extreme level on it. She's pointing out it's not an absolute thing, but she's saying that in Adventist health institutions, they should teach people how that they can do without them. That's an educational process. It's not shaming people. It's encouraging them. All right. Now, do you know why the meat industry sued Oprah Winfrey?
No idea.
It may be before your time of watching this, but it was back in the I guess it would have been the 90s, because I got a clip of it and I played it. At that time I was trying to learn how to use capture devices so that I could use video in my presentations. And I played this little clip over and over again. And my kids heard it. And Oprah said, "That has just stopped me cold from eating another burger." That's what she was sued for.
Oh, wow.
And you know why she said that?
Why?
Well, I don't want to get sued.
Yeah, that's usually a good motivation for people not to say anything, because they don't want to get sued. That'll keep most people quiet, especially if you don't have the money to defend yourself.
Yep. Well, I give an indication of it, and this is something that is an industry issue, and there is evidence for it, and it backs up what she's saying about the increase of disease in the animal kingdom. And I will leave it at that. But the evidence that she saw that day led her to say, "That has stopped me cold from eating another burger."
Yeah, I mean, and that part of it, that can be totally legitimate. I'll probably agree with her on that regard. That in the 1800s, if I saw how the meat wasn't even being refrigerated, and how, you might see worms or maggots or some crazy diseases, just visibly seeing these maggots on your food, or stuff like that. I can relate to somebody in the 1800s having that perception. The perspective. Sorry. The reason I disagreed with this quote, and reason I thought it was pretty relevant, is because she claims that the light of God is telling her that we're not supposed to eat flesh meat. No, decidedly no. So,
but on what basis? They should point out the increase of disease in the animal kingdom. This is not on principle of meat, but this is on principle of health.
So do you think God really gave her a prophecy that human beings from 1897 should no longer be eating any meat?
She didn't say that ever.
Well, what does she mean?
But she's saying that we should educate away from it. See, I think this is part of what we needed to discuss here, is that you're seeing her statements in absolutist terms. And of course, there are other people that would too.
Yeah.
But I would say my eating some goat on one occasion 5 years ago is not a violation of the general direction of my life. It's not going to change my health for one time to eat it. But if I eat it over a period of time and I eat the meat that is prepared the way that it's grown in this country, I will live. I will have to live knowing that there are consequences. Now, I know this is a hard thing to hear when you like eating meat.
Can you scroll up to the part where she's saying the light has shown her that we should decidingly not eat meat? Because that's the part that I really disagree with.
This is a manuscript she's writing within the health institutions. Okay, this
Sure.
If we further put the context, you see they were having a debate. Okay, shall we have some meat in our fare for the patients, or shall we not? And she says, decidedly not. And so they at that time in Seventh-day Adventist institutions, they had a priority on not just dealing with people's surgeries and illness like that, but they were truly lifestyle centers, like the place that I went to. And so when they came there, people would know that they had completely left out meat, and they were showing them a different way of living so that they could avoid the illnesses that they knew from study. Do you know the name Kellogg? What the name
Cereal?
Kellogg?
The cereal?
Cereal is one Kellogg. He was a brother,
Uh-huh.
and the brother to him was named John Harvey Kellogg. Kellogg was a famous surgeon and physician in Battle Creek, Michigan, who had presidents and elite people from all over the world coming to his institution to gain their health back. And he understood these principles and he applied them. He also used hydrotherapy, which is another aspect of the Adventist health message at this time. And I still use hydrotherapy, by the way. That's another subject. We wanted to just talk about meat here tonight.
Sure.
But he used all of these principles to reverse disease states, to improve people's health, to help them gain back their health. And so the question here is, shall human beings live on the flesh of dead animals? No. The answer from the light God has given is no. That we would do better to do without it. Did she shame people for not? No. Did she use meat in her life? At times, through her life, she used some meat when it was difficult to get any other kind of food. There are times that it becomes a necessity. But when you look at these quotations, she's saying it is not a necessity, and there is a healthier way. We each have a choice as to whether we want that healthier way or not. And I know a lot of the folks that are watching this may be very mad at me at this moment. I haven't been looking at the comments because I'm I just want to stay on track and to answer the questions the best that I can. But I can imagine, because if this is something that you like, you're going to find a reason for saying, well, it doesn't matter. But I'm just saying I'm offering an opportunity for people to look at something different and maybe get better results than what they've been doing. Maybe get off some of the medications that they've been on. Not to say, just drop them and live without them. No, you probably would die without those medications. But I know a way, having been at this place, Uchee Pines, and there are others like it around the country and around the world, that actually look at your diet, look at your what's making you sick, and help you to steer away from it so that you can enjoy better health and you're not dependent on medications to survive. There is another way. Not everybody's going to accept it. And God bless you if you can't, and you've got to go with something else. You know, I don't want you to die, but there is another option. And that was what she was presenting, what Adventists were presenting at that time. As far as I know today, even if you go to an Adventist hospital, you'll get some of this, because we still do have lifestyle educators that work with people, but you may not see it nearly as much as at that time, or as you will see it in places like Uchee Pines, which I would highly recommend to anybody that can afford it and would and have need to go there.
Yeah, I again, the only thing that I think she went, like, if she presented this as her personal preference and what she saw in her anecdotal life experience, or what she has studied scientifically through the doctors she's, familiar with, that'd be fine to me. I think where, to me, it gets into bad area is saying that the light has shown her and God has shown her, because, as you're aware, many Adventists do view her as a prophet of God. So, they follow her and they take her words very seriously. So if somebody were to go their entire life not eating meat because they read this quote, and I know you said it may have been directed at a certain group of people, but the way it's worded just in this isolated context, when I read it, it seems like for all shall human beings. So she's not just speaking to a select group of people, she's speaking to humanity. I think she goes way too far saying God has shown her something. Because again, if I go to the Bible, I can show the prodigal son. I can show Genesis 9:3, where God gives Noah all the creatures, after the flood, when the world's getting repopulated. Jesus eating fish in the lamb, the disciples living that lifestyle, being fishermen, all the righteous people from Abraham, Joseph, the patriarchs, Moses, they all ate meat, according to the Bible, and it was a commandment to eat the lamb. So, where she says God showed her this, I think I'm very hesitant personally when I say things, even when I have personal revelation and I say God showed it to me. I don't expect everybody to believe me, because it's my own testimony of supernatural events, or things that God has given me in privacy. So I understand that some people might take it and believe it, and other people won't. My thing is with Ellen White is she's in an authoritative position amongst the group of people she's in, the SDAs, and she's a leader. So she needs to be very careful on what she says is from God, because if she's teaching something that Jesus didn't teach, and then people live their whole life in accordance with that, then she's essentially, changing what the scripture taught, so that's where I had a problem with this one. But, I hear points that you're making too. And I'm not dismissing all validity of what you're saying. Trust me, I get the health aspect of it.
Yeah, and here and you can see I've highlighted the main point for me.
You've highlighted and made it size 44 font.
Yeah, I suffer as a pastor when people make certain choices, and because of my background in health, I know that they wouldn't have to suffer, but I shut my mouth. Yeah. If somebody has an open mind to a possibility, and that's why I've shared it with you, because you seem pretty open-minded, is that there might be something better here for people than they know today. And you can rationalize it with the fatted calf or whatever, incidental times that people ate meat in those times, but that doesn't change the increase of disease in the animal kingdom today. Whatever they did 2,000 years ago really has nothing to do with the food industry today.
I mean, morally speaking, it still does. Because that's like saying any moral command that was relevant for them at the time doesn't have anything to do with us today. Because I do think the dietary law is part of morality that God taught people. You know what I mean? So I would disagree with you on that. I understand your point about.
Well, here's what I'm saying. You know what grain-fed cattle are?
I can't tell you the difference between grain-fed and if they ate anything else any other day. I have no idea the difference.
Okay. Well, grain fed sounds like it would be a good thing, right?
Sure, sure. In theory, sure.
In theory. But you know what cattle normally eats?
What grass? Just normal grass?
Grass. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the difference between grain and grass? Well, grain actually comes from a grass,
Yeah.
but it's more acidic than grass.
Yeah.
So grain-fed cattle live their lives standing and eating grain. They're not free range.
Yeah.
They don't walk around. They are fattened up. And this might, I'm not trying to call out the moral issue here, about how you treat the cow, to be that his whole life is just going to be sacrificed someday.
Yeah.
That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that when a cow eats a high acid diet, they get ulcers in their stomach, up their throat, and the only way that they can deal with that is to feed them antibiotics to kill those bacteria that are causing the destruction of their esophagus and stomach. You get their antibiotics in their meat. Yeah. So grain-fed cattle are giving us antibiotics, which makes us more vulnerable to bacteria because the bacteria have already been exposed to the antibiotics, and that's why we have more difficulty controlling disease through antibiotics, and they have to come up with more exotic forms because we overuse them and because they're fed to chickens and to cattle and so on. So part of this is because of the industry creates a methodology that is good for their bottom line, but not good for the health of those who consume them.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just one example of how the human manipulation of the food chain is causing some of our multiple problems that we have today.
Yeah, the one thing like I would say is if the vegetables today or the fruits today are covered in more pesticides, they could, have a similar less healthy state, just like you're saying the cows may have, from the antibiotics and other things. But I still don't think it would be appropriate for me to ever say, well, God, the light has shown me that you should no longer eat, just say carrots because, pesticides are getting put on the carrots. Like, even if the pesticides I know for a fact are being put on the carrots, I wouldn't say God showed me that. I would say, listen, I physically saw this at so-and-so company at so-and-so time. I wouldn't give the information to people as if God himself gave it to me. And again,
you shouldn't.
Yeah. So we'll go.
And you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But if she was shown this and it is true, see, this brings us, I guess we probably, we've exhausted pretty much the issues that you've brought up, but there's a whole different way of approaching her, and that's why I have my channel. Sure. Is that there is validation of her gift, and it is because we took these principles seriously that we were able to deal with disease at Uchee Pines. It worked. It was a system that actually worked. And
go ahead.
It worked.
Yeah, I just think even with the Bible itself, people can take one verse and then create an entire doctrine out of it. So that's where it's even exegeting the Bible, we all have to be very careful that we just don't take one verse and then make a doctrine out of it. And that's kind of the brilliance of God's word, is there's very few spots where people can even take those verses and then create these unbiblical doctrines, because God is so perfect in how he writes his story, that it's not easy to manipulate what God's point is, especially since he repeats it in other stories, and the moral concept is taught through Jesus and Jesus's life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can misinterpret anything or take anything out of context. I think with Ellen White, one thing that I'm noticing is I think within her writings, it may have been like in a conversation way less harmful if you're just having a conversation like me and you are having, and she said, God's really put it in my heart not to do this. But
Mhm.
when you write it down and then somebody like me or you is reading it 120 years later, and you
Right.
see God has put it in my heart, it's how you exegete that that's going to totally determine how much emphasis you put on that being unbiblical or biblical. The way you're interpreting it, I can tell, is more like if we're having a conversation and she said, God put it in my heart. And I get that part of it. Where I'm hesitant to agree with you on that interpretation is the danger of if people take it literally and don't take it as casual as it could have been intended by her, and people then just stop eating meat since 1897 and the whole world changes and follows what Ellen White wrote. Then are we following what Jesus and the Bible taught, or are we following what Ellen White said in a casual conversation? So that's kind
Yeah.
of the line.
Actually, it's an interesting thought experiment, but I doubt that
Yeah,
it would ever happen.
sure. No, I agree. I mean, people are
Yeah,
too
I doubt that it
individual.
would ever happen,
Yeah.
but there it would be far more sustainable to live off of vegetables. Do you know the concentration of the amount of agriculture to meat to the consumer versus if we just ate the grain rather than feeding it to the animal and then consuming it? It's far more sustainable. So actually, if we all did that, we wouldn't be a loser.
Yeah, no, I've heard a vegetarian make a good point once where he said, look at the cow or look at the horse, look at the animal that only eats the grass and the grain. Look how powerful they are. Think about, any bigot, a giraffe or something or whatever. Think about how big they are. And I don't know about elephants, so I shouldn't speak on them. But I think
They're vegetarian.
yeah.
Elephants
Look
are
at an elephant. So that was the vegetarian's point. He was in the gym working out, and he's like, "I don't need that. I can get just as big off of this." And that's a personal choice. Like I said, where I draw the line is saying God gave me the information. But again, it could be I could be exegeting it too powerfully. Her emphasis might have been more of a casual God put it in my heart, and we could all understand that. When you're writing something, you don't know if people are going to read it 150 years later, especially when probably some of her writings, you're probably more familiar than me. They might have just been her personal writings that people found. I don't know. Your channel is where we would get that type of information. So some of it may have been prescriptive to people, and some of it could have just been her personal diary. I don't know the origin of all her writings, but I do try to give grace on how I interpret things.
I
It's just
appreciate that.
yeah, I just do have to be careful also on like what I put into practice. And I try to keep the Bible as my ultimate standard of truth and compare and contrast everything with the Bible. And if it jives with Jesus's life and Jesus's teachings, I do, as you do too, as all Christians do, right? That's
Every honest Christian should. Yes.
that's our standard. So yeah,
Yeah.
we could go through more quotes if you want, but we don't have to go through all 10 unless you want to. But I would like to kind of touch on also the Adventist concept of like heaven being like the Garden of Eden, because that's something again where I don't really agree with that. But I know that's where Ellen White and a lot of Adventists get this eat only fruits and grains concept. So for your side of things, you don't have to, and I'm putting you on the spot, but if you want to kind of speak to that, maybe that will give people a better understanding on why the SDA, put so much, emphasis into Ellen White's dietary work, because that does play a significant role. The fact that she's saying that heaven will be in us, or you guys believe, absent from what she says, that heaven will be like the Garden of Eden, right? Or am I misrepresenting? You tell me.
I'm not sure where you're getting it.
Well, I've talked to Jamie Russell, so he's kind of my
Okay.
best friend. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yeah, he's a
And
good guy.
yeah, he's a good guy. See, my crowd here, you're probably got like 10 to 20% Adventists on a good day, depending, like Stefan's an Adventist, Jamie's an Adventist, a few other people. So
Yeah.
you are in the lion's den here as far as the comment section is concerned. And we've all done that on
Okay.
YouTube. So,
Yeah.
don't pay too much mind to what if people are disagreeing. If I went on the Adventist Defense League, like I have once, they're not going to agree with most of the things I say. So it is what it is. We've all done the go into the other YouTube demographic. But Jamie Russell one time did a video, and some of the times I've read Ellen White's writings, it seems like that's part of the doctrine, the concept that we'll return to Eden and be eating.
Oh, okay. From Eden to Eden.
Yeah, I guess you would know better than me how she puts it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, see, part of it is it's kind of like and this is a whole different subject. Other people who aren't Adventists will tell me that I believe in soul sleep.
Yeah.
That's not an Adventist concept. That's another concept trying to figure out how to describe an Adventist concept.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably what's going on here to try to understand the Eden to Eden kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about heaven. We're talking about the earth made new. We're talking about the earth made new. The Eden to Eden is from the earth before sin to the earth after sin. What is your concept of what the earth is like if sin is not on the planet? Do you have a concept of that?
Just following Jesus, just doing what Jesus taught, living in harmony with each other like the early apostles. To me, the closest earth being in harmony with God would be is the early I'll mispronounce the word, but the early church that the apostles were establishing, where everybody's sharing and they're just praying every day, going to the temple every day. And, that to me, that's the closest we've gotten almost on earth, is right after Jesus and what the apostles got established. It seems like from there, people stopped sharing their money, and separation occurred, and so we never quite got there. But that's the closest I'd say conceptually.
So you're looking at interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, and just because I think it is important, like as Christians, the church, like we don't, especially on YouTube. Some people don't even have churches. Their church is just these YouTube channels and interactions, which it's not a good thing that people have gotten to that point, because it's always good to go and physically be with people. Like Jesus said, when two or more have gathered in my name, I'm also there. So I'm sure he's there in these interactions also, but he's also, you feel his spirit and his presence, especially in a church or a temple, a holy building, more so than just being on the internet in your own house. I'm in my house, you're in your house. So we can pray together like this over the computer, but it's not the same as when we're praying together in the same room,
Not the same. You're right.
Not the same. So, so to me, that is part of it. The interpersonal, establishing the church, being one in spirit, one in mind, one in sharing things, which is a huge thing, because then the poor people, we have less suffering when we're all one together, and granted, I don't have the ability to heal people like the apostles did, and I can't do any of those miracles, but obviously that played a significant role in why that state was an ideal state too, is that they could just, if somebody's sick, they can heal them, if somebody's disabled like I am, they just heal them, so that was as close as I think we've gotten to an ideal state on earth.
Okay. Well, I would agree with you on all of that. That's ideal. But what the Eden to Eden is talking about is the physical world. Romans talks about that the natural world groans for its redemption.
Uh-huh.
Because what we're living in now is a sin-affected world. Even the best of vegetables, we talked a little bit about that haven't been contaminated or manipulated or bombarded with pesticides that are not healthy for us. Even the best organic and whatever you're going to see certain elements of decay. The genetics, our genetics, the longer we live on this planet, the more we pass on genetic breakage within our DNA to our kids and then our grandkids. And so it's more likely that we'll see illness that is the result of decay, and the world around us is in decay. So the point that we're making is that when God makes the earth new, and that's his own description in the Bible,
Yep.
We're not going to live in a system of decay.
Sure. For me, excuse me, I also think where I disagree with the Eden to Eden, and that was a great point that you brought up, because I've never heard an Adventist say that. Because to me, they've always, the way I've heard what they've said is they've kind of presented it like Eden to Eden is what heaven will be like, but you said it's for the earth. That's a big difference. That's a big difference right there.
Yeah,
So
because heaven is a parenthesis, and if we go into that in our theology of that and understanding it from Revelation, it's going to take us another 2 hours. So let's not do that.
Yeah, no, I got you. All right, but I just wanted to ask you about it quickly, and I'm glad I did, because you're the first Adventist that's really put that in perspective for me. So yeah, we can go on to another quote or whatever if you want to talk about something else. Like I said, I just kind of threw a random topic at you. If you want to talk to me about anything, feel free. I don't know, whatever you prefer.
I tell you what, jot down some of your topics and we'll make another video.
Sure. As far as because I think we looking at some of our other quotes, they are kind of like overlapping. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of, similar points. And she just said it at a later time. You know what I mean? So some of these are redundant to what we've already discussed. But yeah, as far as being an SDA and an SDA pastor, like what other topic would you be open to discuss? Because one thing that I have a disagreement with SDA on is the mark of the beast. I'm supposed to go on to the Adventist Defense League at some point and speak about that. They wanted to talk about the seal of God before the mark of the beast. So I've only done one stream with them and we spoke about that. But I don't know. What other topic would you like to talk about? Because I'm open to what you'd like to talk about too. Like as far as being an SDA, I know like the Sabbath is a big point of emphasis for you guys. Like what's the main, if you had to give me or anybody a message on why you think we should become SDA, because you are SDA pastor, what's your pitch?
Well, thank you for the opportunity for that. I would say from my book title this is a major issue. Sabbath rest, is there something missing in your busy life? And I think that God intended that we enjoy the Sabbath. I celebrate people that, there are a lot of people, and you may not even know all of the people, but there are some people that I just recently heard that politics, Christian music, different ones who recognize the value of the Sabbath. And I would encourage, as far as somebody wanting to become a Seventh-day Adventist, we offer that because we understand it. We've got folks that come to our church they're kind of coming looking around to see, are we handling snakes? Or are we doing, something weird here? And there's none of that. I remember that look on people's face. And then they come in and they see, oh, this is something really different. And the whole day is different. The Sabbath is different. It is not like Sunday. It's not one concentrated hour and then go back and do your own thing. Mm-hmm. The Sabbath is a break from the pressure of the world around you, and this opportunity to put up a protective barrier for that special time, for communion with God, for acknowledging Him, and giving yourself physical rest as well as spiritual rest. That would be one big thing. The second is the hope of the Adventist part. Jesus is coming again. And that was our lifeblood. We were Adventists before we were Seventh-day Adventists. We come out of that movement. that people, through the difficulties of life and what the world faces, they recognize that Jesus is coming again, and he's coming soon, and we need to prepare our hearts. Now, if he delays a few more years, it's immaterial to your preparation today, because you may not have next week. You may not have 2 days from now. We don't know when our time ends, but we do have today. And Hebrews tells us, while it is today, commit your life to him. Open your heart to him. Receive him. So it would be those two things. The rest that's offered in the Sabbath that gives this very special experience with God, and the hope that we have of the second advent. There are other things that you could bring out, but that's in our name. So it was pretty important. We put it in our name.
Yeah. I agree with both of those things. I mean, I try to keep the Sabbath, and I'm not perfect at it, obviously. I mean, sometimes I might, have family members that don't participate and they want to eat dinner or something, and it kind of puts me in a hard spot where I'm kind of thinking of Matthew 15 and Mark 7 about love your mother, or, what do you do? What do you do? And it's
Right.
not always an easy navigation around the world when they're not practicing it themselves. But I try to keep the Sabbath too. And that's kind of where, I've had, discussions with Seventh-day Adventists about the mark of the beast. And it kind of, a big part of it is keeping the Sabbath, and then the Sunday law gets into it. And that's where, I kind of disagree, because I'm kind of like a living proof that I can keep the Sabbath still and also still go to church on Sunday. And I think it's just biblical, because Jesus and the apostles were in the church teaching every day that, we should go to church Monday through Sunday, every day, 7 days a week. So there's nothing ever wrong with Sunday worship, but that's a totally different topic. Your two messages I agree with. For me, I also try to remind people, just from my own life experience, Jesus never left us, because, we can also say prepare like he's coming back, but it's also good to keep in your heart and mind. And I know you do, but not just in spirit, but he's physically here whenever we need him, because my own life has been a living testimony to that. So Jesus
Amen.
is not just, gonna one day change everything, but he's here right now too. And, just call upon him. But this is Pastor Morgan's channel. For anybody that wasn't here in the beginning, please subscribe. It's something you can do for free. It doesn't cost you any money. He's got a lot of good content. It's not, all SDA. Again, as you just heard, it's Christian information that you can learn from, and also SDA information. Obviously that's a big part of it, but he's got a lot of good stuff. It's free. You can help another Christian spread the gospel more so. So please subscribe. And yeah, thanks for spending as much time. I didn't know we were going to do 2 hours, but you were willing to go through these quotes, man. And I kind of put you on defense because I picked these quotes out. So it's not like you got to go to the parts of Ellen White's food writings that are advantageous to you. So I do
well, my videos I do, but I will be uploading the one where I actually go through same kind of stuff that we were talking about. The video is ready to upload, but I appreciate the opportunity you've given me. This has been a great blessing, Ryan, and I pray God's blessing for you and for all your viewers, that they will continue to walk in truth and to make the Bible the guide for their lives.
Amen. Thank you for coming. And guys, that's a great note to end it on. So thank you for everyone who watched, and have a good one. God bless.
All right. Take care.
Take care.